I'm told we have 25 minutes, so we're going to speed run through this. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm Ed. I run gaming at Ava Labs. It's great to see everybody here. I've heard a lot that this is the year of subnets, so we're just going to add a gaming in front of there. Really excited to have these three gentlemen up here. So maybe just quick intros, and we'll get this thing started. So Calvin, you look very different than your picture.
I aged quite a bit.
Yeah. Who you are, about your game, and yeah.
Sure. Calvin Zhou, co-founder of Shrapnel. Our game is a AAA UGC-driven FPS on the blockchain. So think if Roblox and Call of Duty had a baby on a blockchain, it'd be us.
Faun?
Yeah, I look a little different than my picture too, so don't worry. Yeah, my name is Mr. Faun. Super nice of Frisky Fox and Dreamer to give me a shout out, but they deserve a lot of credit and our team. But I work on the DeFi Kingdoms project. I'm the director of Solidity over there, and excited to chat with you guys.
Got a whole squad.
Yeah, the squad's being great over here.
Yeah. And we do not have Car today, but we actually have Tender. Tender.
Yeah. Hi everyone. This is Tender from Crabada. I look exactly like this, so that's me. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's get into it. Yeah. So each of you has taken a different path to get here. Crabada is one of the early games. DFK is bridging over, and Shrapnel still under construction. Tell us really quickly how you got red pilled and how you got into subnets.
Sure. So we're looking at subnets. We really like the flexibility and customization of what subnets offer. We view it as essentially a dedicated shard that lets us be very modular with the architecture, and that is a definition of future-proof.
Yeah, so our experience, I'll talk to my experience and then the team's experience a bit. I started as an Avalanche developer. I was on the platform before I joined the DeFi Kingdoms team. So I was red-pilled pretty early on. Then joining the team, I moved over to working on the Harmony network. And when we had the opportunity to discuss coming back to Avalanche, I was all for it. I was super excited. And then to even dive in more to what was possible with the subnets, I think the entire team kind of, as we were talking, realized, this is just the future of gaming. This is the modularity that we need to be able to adapt as we grow. And, we'll get into all the details, but it was just an obvious choice for us, especially with the plans to go multi-chain, and we're super excited to be here.
Yeah, and I think for us, we like to do experiments. So I think subnets was part of our strategy, even pre-launch. And just because of we decided to do something on-chain, we always knew it was gas intensive, super hard to figure out the economics of it, and I think subnets was a very sort of like natural route for us, and super giga brain by I think like Ava Labs to be planning this. Yeah.
Just want to add real quick that we like the ability to create our own gas token, and so that leads to a really good user experience in that they don't have to hold 2 tokens to pay for gas. It's just one. Most users get confused if there's more than 1 token, so I think that's a pretty good use case for subnets as well.
Nice. I think you guys bottled up my sales pitch pretty well. So I think it's really cool because we actually have the first 2 non-Ava Labs built subnets on stage right now that are going to be releasing in the next few weeks, right? So this question is maybe for Faun and for Tender, but what are some of the surprising or difficult parts that you ran into when you guys were putting together Swimmer Network and DeFi Kingdoms chain?
So first of all, I'll say working with Ava Labs directly, some of the tools that they've been putting together have been extremely good. They've been really easy to work with, especially, there's got the new subnet CLI, different features that they push out that, made pushing up a subnet pretty fast. And people have asked me, like, how long does it take to put up a subnet? You could do it, you could learn it and do it in a day if you really wanted to. So the hard part is, what do you now do after you've actually done the actual infrastructure launch with their tooling? So some of the more difficult parts were, how do we make this chain full featured like people tend to expect on other chains, whether it has to do with coming up with ensuring you have integration with safe contracts, like in our instance, Gnosis safes, whether you have the bridging solutions, all these kind of auxiliary products that become so normal on all the other chains. We did have to kind of solve for those early on since we were one of the first people doing it.
Yeah, so I think when we looked at subnets, like the possibilities that of what could be done, we wanted to do something that was very tailored specifically for gaming. It was still very experimental. We had to bounce a lot of ideas of with the Ava Labs teams. A lot of the conversations went like, "Is this gonna work? Well, let's try it and find out." And yeah, so. Initially, we wanted to do something like very close to a gasless experience, just because we feel like that was closing the UX gap a lot for Web 2 to Web 3 gaming. We managed to accomplish, I think, have a very elegant solution, to achieve that. And yeah, it is very experimental, as Faun has said. Yeah.
If I could actually add one more thing. Being experimental early on has been fantastic, but I can't even, I probably shouldn't even say this, but I will. I can't tell you how many test nets I launched and just totally bricked or broke, just trying to like try different feed configurations, different like strategies and things like that. So one of the early things that's difficult is, just figuring it out at first and making sure you have the right structure set up. And, I think it was Patrick O'Grady that told me, he's like, yeah, I launched like 50 of these things. And so don't feel bad that you've done like 10 or so and you just haven't quite got it right. But after you iterate quite a few times, you kind of start to understand the mechanics.
Yeah, you guys have made really good use of the group chat you got going on with that.
Yeah, they probably want to remove me sometime.
Tender, I want to kind of dive in a little bit to what you were saying, which was, a lot has been made around transaction fees for chains and comparing them to one another. You guys were exploring doing something totally gasless. Swimmer Network now takes some TUS to do transactions. Like, what were some of the thinking and conversations you had behind the scenes of gasless or not?
Yeah, so I think just for context, we were actually originally looking at just not even having a gas token. So, but that I think that was a bit. There were areas that we couldn't really cover, safely as a result. It's sort of like flipping some things around as with regards to Sybil attacks. Yeah, so for our current solution, what we have is a way to use TUS, which is something that's created by Crabs already, to the analogy is like mining Ethereum blocks with your Crabs. Right, and these are sort of like these tokens are produced by players themselves, and it's used within the entire ecosystem. One thing we've done is to sort of like abstract away that TUS consumption layer. So we've put in place a way for developers to pay gas fees instead of the players themselves. So what this means is that you have use cases where you could be buying an NFT like via an in-app purchase and just play on it without even having to bridge the gas token. And for games that are play to start, this is even so much more powerful because you can have a user authenticate and get started playing all without gas. And that is sort of the experience that we sort of like think it's really closing the gap between Web 2 and Web 3.
Cool. I think everybody here probably knows the high level of what the benefit of subnets are, right? You can set custom validators, custom gas token. You have your own private chain, but what I'm personally excited about is I think that we're just scratching the surface of use cases and innovations and why it's so cool to bring on more and more games onto subnets. So, anything you guys can share about what's unique to your subnet or like what you've done to kind of push the envelope or something that we can expect coming to your chains?
I think for us, the ability to spin up multiple chains on the subnet can lead to some pretty interesting use cases.
Yeah, you kind of stole mine a little there, but I was going to say I'm excited to be able to have multi-chains with different virtual machines. That's one of the core pieces of the subnet, and so the opportunity to make really tight integrations with different. Avalanche is a great example of this. The X chain, C chain, P chain. I'm excited to explore that. I don't have any alpha to drop on what we're looking at in that area, but it's going to be unique and it's a great functionality.
So expand on that. So offering for different language support on different chains.
Yeah, so we've been discussing since DeFi Kingdoms has had the plan to be multi-chain, long term. If we want to have a chain that's compatible with non-EVM chains, we can make a really tight integration.
You don't need to do
between
that.
those
You're
two.
good.
I don't know if we're going to do it. I don't know. We're hoping to keep a lot in Avalanche. We really like the subnet so far, but we're exploring a lot of the potential opportunities.
Yeah, and so I think for us, like our core focus would still be, improving the experience on Swimmer Network. Focusing on improvements to make it easier for applications, for developers. So not so much multi-chain. I think just focusing on just getting a really good experience and scaffolding from there.
Yeah, and if you guys haven't tried it out, Swimmer Network, which is the Crabada subnet, is actually on testnet. And you hear a lot about theoretically what a subnet does and how fast it is, but actually going out and trying it, it's crazy. So I encourage everybody to go check it out when you get a chance. With your subnets, you obviously need validators. I'm assuming that people are banging down your doors to become validators. How are you thinking about choosing that, incentivizing them, rewarding them? Faun? Oh, Calvin?
Sure, we're looking at the community and ecosystem in Avalanche. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so in the crowd we have one of our teammates, Soron, and he gets a ton of pings all the time from community members that are like, I want to run a validator on your subnet, I want to run a validator on subnet. So for us, the decision, at least to start, was less about like having just an open ability, making it permissionless, and really trying to be strategic about what a validator means and what it can mean inside of our game and for our community. The way we've started to approach it in the early stages is we really wanted to use that as a tool to create partnerships with other projects. So all the partnerships that Dreamer and Fox were discussing right before I came on, we're starting with allowing them to be our initial set of validators. We created a portal that's it's validators.dfkchain.com. I think it's coming soon on that screen if you go there now. That allows them to receive their incentives in different structures. But long term down the road, what we hope to be able to do with validators is integrate it into some sort of the game and provide, more partnerships with maybe potential guilds, which is a roadmap of ours inside of the game. And I think Subnets offers this really unique opportunity in the space of gaming where validators can be an incentive program for your game if you make it part of it, if you kind of plan that into it. For non-gaming experiences, it might be more traditional, but we're trying to push to make that an experience as well as, something that secures the network.
Yeah, cool. So I think Mr. Faun has I think it's a really good strategy. We're doing something similar, which is for a new subnet, you kind of want to just be a bit careful and do things a bit on a smaller scale, just get the formula right, and then scaffold from there into something bigger. So for us, we chose to start with 10 validators, 3 of which we're running ourselves. And for 7th, we're actually choosing from the community, the Avalanche community, the Crabs community, and sort of like reputable partners that that we can work with, right? So to just get the teething issues out of the way. And what we want to do is to just increase the number of validators as well as the network grows, and as well as the amount of CRA stake that is required to run a validator. So there are 2 ways for us to scale up the validator set. Yeah. So what I think is super cool as well is delegation, because we're still so early on and there isn't any proper delegation tools. But what we put in place is allow validators the ability to support delegations on their end itself. So maybe later on we could introduce tooling, but right now, for any of our validators, they could introduce, for example, liquid staking, or even just within a contract itself, offer staking to the CRA community, right? And I think I think we're just super excited to see this happen. Yeah.
You guys are starting off with a fixed number of validators just to see what happens. Ideally, how many validators do you have? Do you open that up? Have you thought about the longer term strategy there?
Yeah. So I think, I'll just take this first. So I think when it comes to validators, especially for us when cross-staking is involved, we think about validator economics as well, because validators have operational costs as well. And for us, it's sort of like thinking, or planning, what is the range that sort of makes sense for validators? Because as much as we want validators to come in, they're also taking risk as well for trying new things along with us, and we just want to make sure that they are rewarded for taking the risk as well. Yeah.
And I like the fact that with subnets and the flexibility control you have over them, you can sort of, as a game, you can sort of scale into decentralization as you see fit. Eventually, in the beginning, a game could have a lot of bugs and errors that you sort of need that centralization. And then as time progresses and the game progresses, you could obviously try to scale into decentralization and offer that flexibility.
For us, I think we're going to be watching very carefully what Ava Labs does in the realm of what's possible, because right now I think it's really more of kind of a proof of authority system where you kind of whitelist your validators and you allocate weight based on yourselves. It's not really set up to be truly permissionless. We are trying to implement like a layer on top of that we're going to be moderating and doing ourselves to, allow staking and allow, some systems to secure the network using XJoule. But as the tooling starts to become more available to us, if we can get closer to like a permissionless system, I think our team being in the decentralized space would like to see that. But we're really just going to kind of take it slow at first, since we are some of the first people doing this, and see what becomes available and what can be supported by the integrated subnet system.
We've got a lot of devs in the crowd and a lot of game devs also. They're watching you guys closely and seeing how the subnets go. Any advice or tips or lessons learned to help them on their perilous journey to subnets?
Well, you said the perilous journey, which high chance of death in our world if you go on the perilous journey. Tips. I would say get started on testnet. I love that Crabada's on testnet live and allowing people to use that. It's free, you can do it by just using the faucet. Get started on testnet and experiment with it. I do think that for games that are getting started new, there is going to be a little bit of a barrier to entry in the amount of, stake you need to put up, and then also just getting communities to be willing to come into your network, because they will have to bridge in. So just be aware that, make a strategy for how you can instill confidence for people to move their funds into your subnet when it is a little bit more centralized at first than, traditional chains. I think trying to think that through would be an important step.
Yeah. So I think even from a development point of view, you want to understand what are the use cases that you're trying to achieve with your subnet. Because it's easy to spin up a EVM copy, but what is the outcome that you actually want? Is this to simplify your economics because you're spending too much gas on chain like Crabada, or is there something like that you can do? So see, for example, if you have a sort of like a multi-chain strategy, or if you're thinking about just implementing multi-chain within the core game loop itself, like for example with like DFK, then use that as a guiding point to sort of determine what you actually want for your subnet. And I think Ava Labs the Avalanche team is actually doing a really good job at releasing support for subnets. So for example, it's so easy to deploy EVM now. Back then we were forking C-chain ourselves, and now you have, I think, the stateful precompiles as well, which allows you to simplify a lot of the things that I think DFK and us had to go through. So I think the opportunity cost or rather it's much lower lift to get started now and experiment. Yeah.
Cool. I think everyone's excited for Crabada to move to a subnet so you can stop spiking the gas for everybody else. But beyond that, how much does tokenomics play into the subnet strategy, right? Because both of your games, and not sure about Shrapnel, but have this governance token, you've got an inflationary token, and you can do pretty interesting things with that. How much of that was a factor while you guys were strategizing and deciding if you wanted to build on a subnet? Anybody?
Yeah, so I'll say I'm not the tokenomics guy for the project. I'm involved in a lot of the conversations, but right away, early on, because our project is originally on Harmony, we have the Joule, we have a lot of community members that hold Joule. The subnet tokenomics affects it dramatically. When we first announced we were going to go multi-chain with Avalanche, we didn't announce that we were planning on doing a subnet because we were kind of still investigating. And we had a lot of people that were concerned that, we have a $500 million cap of Joule, and then now they're going to mint 125 million Crystal, and, is there going to be this problem with inflation that's going to occur as they continue to expand? Something that we discussed heavily coming into the subnet was this opportunity to now instill this 50% burn mechanic in the Joule as it's spent through a gas system that we were extremely excited about, because it really wasn't a clean way to instill a burn mechanic into the game outside of the potential offerings of a subnet. And so, in my opinion, if you play it right, it's going to be, especially if it makes sense in the sense of burning for us, subnet tokenomics can really be a positive upward pressure for your utility token that previously didn't have a lot of usability.
Yeah. So I think when we were planning the tokenomics for subnet, so on one hand, we have the validators as well, and the players as well. There are some sort of like easy bounds that you can sort of plan around. So say, for example, every player has an operating cost, and that is sort of information for you to sort of like plan how much the network fees would be, and you're able to use the network price as well as a lever to sort of like find a balance. And if you build in the ability to sort of like adjust this later on as the network grows, and also depending on your strategies to like build out an ecosystem, for example, or introduce more features, then there are sort of like certain bounds that you can play with in order to sort of help with the economics. Yeah.
Well, similar to when play to earn first came out with Axie, it led to a bunch of other companies like exploding around that, guilds, investment DAOs, tooling around NFTs. Do you see that potentially happening with subnets, or any types of service offerings or kind of companies being built around that, or any ideas?
I think the initial subnet offering is kind of the word that I've heard getting thrown around a lot, and I'm excited to with some
expand on that if anybody doesn't know.
Oh yeah. So what I understand as the initial subnet offering is that you can manipulate the fee structure or the network structure or even the virtual machine of your subnet in a way that's unique to other chains, and then open it up in like a permissionless way for people to deploy contracts and deploy their own protocols and things on top of it. So I think this year specifically, we're going to see a lot of people trying to be, unique in the way that they configure their subnets for different use cases. One being gaming, but I'm sure. I mean, yesterday we spoke with the company that's doing the KYC subnet. I think there's a great use case there. In the sense of like gaming and DFK, what I think is going to be really interesting with what our subnet will be offering is, as we begin to open it up to the community to be building on it, games that may not have the full resources to launch their own subnet are going to be able to leverage in a way that cloud providers kind of leverage servers for traditional infrastructure. You're going to be able to use subnets that fit your use case to launch your apps and protocols, and I hope to see that explode and allow us to kind of become interoperable between each subnets and have like very specific apps on specific subnets that are best for them.
Yeah. So I think, or rather like, we think that we're super bullish on games just because of the amount of like infrastructure that is sort of like out there. And say, for example, like with bridges, with analytics tools, with infrastructure tools for APIs. There is so much out there for you as a game developer to tap into, sometimes for free, yeah, it's all out there that's available. And for us, we just really believe in the concept of shared infrastructure, where the more parties that are working on like within a similar space, then it sort of brings in more support reflexively, and that is how the ecosystem grows. So say, for example, with subnets right now, there are so many customers, I think, for subnets that would only increase, and yeah, I think it's a great time to be a game right now, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'll let you guys get back to building out your subnets because you got deadlines here. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and round of applause for our panelists.